This is Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Let's get into it. All right, guys, we've got a special guest on the podcast today. His name is Hunter Robichaux. So he's a retired Marine, the son of Chad Robichaux, and he is one of the main figures of this new book, A Mission Without Borders, Why a Father and Son Risked It All for the People of Ukraine. So if you listened earlier this week, you heard from his father, who helped write this book and was kind of the main character of this whole deal. But in this interview today, it was just an interesting perspective after we've gotten the father's perspective to now get the son's perspective. But we talk about, why did he become a Marine? How is this in the Robichaux blood to be United States Marine, but also the politicization of the United States military, which actually helped lead to him leaving the military, how he got into ministry, how he was left out of the Save Our Allies mission to help people in Afghanistan after the U.S. withdrawal, but then how disappointing that was to him, but then also how he got roped into the mission in Ukraine. In the middle of the interview, we kind of both went off on a diatribe a bit about, modern day pastors and modern day Christians not really stepping up, and, there's not really a focus on man-friendly churches, and there's not even really a focus on men's ministry. So we talk a little bit about that, but I really enjoyed his perspective as well, hearing about what Ukrainian pastors are like over there. So these are guys that are helping literally fight the Russians. These are people that are fighting and killing people in this conflict, using just war theory to help push back darkness over there in their country. And so it was interesting to hear his perspective on that. We went and talked about a lot of different things as well. So I just want to go ahead and get you into it. So guys, without further ado, let's get into it. Hunter Robichaux, welcome to Undaunted.Life, a man's podcast.
Man, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It's weird. I feel like I'm collecting Robichauxs at this point because your dad's been on a whole bunch of times. There's you. Like, how many others before I could maybe be considered part of the family? How many more do I have to get to?
There's a list. You'll have to get my brother, my sister, my other sister, my kids.
All right,
brother's kids.
That just became like an extra line item that I don't really have the time to do. But, we need to get into our discussion today. And one of the, I guess, easiest ways is, being a United States Marine just runs in the blood of a Robichaux. So it's just kind of like a thing. It's kind of like the family business. So you're not a former Marine because I've been told there's no such thing, but you are a retired Marine. But let's just start there. What made you interested in joining the military? Why the Marine Corps? Why'd you get out? Let's just start there.
Yeah, well, I wanted to join the best, first of all. I'll start with that. No hate to other branches.
Shots fired.
But no, I have respect for all the branches, but being a Marine was always a goal of mine. I wanted to join something that I took a lot of pride in, something that I saw a lot of men take a lot of pride in, but also the Marine Corps history runs deep in my family. My dad was a Marine. My grandfather was a Marine. My great-grandfather on my mother's side was a Marine in the Pacific in World War II. So there's a lot of history within the Marine Corps, within my family. And I wanted to do something that was bigger than myself, and that was to join the Marine Corps to serve my country. So I had both sides. I wanted to do it because it was family tradition, and I also wanted to serve my country.
And so you served. So how long were you in?
I was in a total of 8 years.
Okay. And so deployed as well?
I did, yeah. I deployed to Afghanistan in 2019.
Let's talk a little bit about why you got out, because that's not like the most fun story, because my understanding is that you did want to stay in, correct?
I did want to stay in. One of the things that I did not like about my later part of being in the military was how political things got. Everybody is entitled to their own opinion about politics, and I respect that. That's part of your freedoms as an American. But when politics get involved in the military, of where you have to make decisions that can ultimately get your Marines killed that are around you, and then things such as the forced vaccine. Thankfully, I did not have to get into a situation where I was either forced to take the vaccine or get pushed out of the Marine Corps. That happened to my little brother, Hayden. He actually got kicked out of the Marine Corps because he did not get the vaccine. But it got so political where I was like, I can either stay in this and deal with the politics and be a sheep and just go with the herd, or I can bow out. I did my time. I did my deployment. I fought for my country. I served my country, which I think every man in our country should do for at least a certain amount of time. And, I felt like God was calling me out of that position. And when I originally went into the Marine Corps, I wanted to do 20 plus years in the Marine Corps. I wanted to become a master gunnery sergeant. I didn't want to be the sergeant major of the Marine Corps or anything like that, but I wanted to be a master gunnery sergeant in my job so that I could give back to my community later, years later on the road.
And so let's talk a little bit about kind of the rug being pulled out from underneath you, because you did say you felt like God was leading you out, but there were plenty of other stimuli kind of pushing you in that direction of leaving. And so when you think you're going to be a 20-year guy and then you get out basically after a couple of contracts, so you got your 8 years in, like that's got to be like, at the very least, it's got to throw your future plans like, into a spin cycle a little bit, to where you're like, man, I really thought I was going to be doing this, but my life took a hard right turn,
Yeah, absolutely. It was a major change of my plan for life. But it was, like I said, where God was calling me. So I had peace about it. I look back at it and I'm glad I made that decision. I'm glad I made that decision to step out of the Marine Corps, because that ultimately pulled me into doing ministry full time. If I wouldn't have gotten out of the Marine Corps, I probably wouldn't have had this opportunity to serve more people. I get to serve more people now than I did in the Marine Corps. And so God prepared me for this time in ministry in my time in the Marine Corps.
Okay, so what was the ministry that you got into right after you left the Marine Corps?
Yeah, so my family started Mighty Oaks in 2011, and many of you are familiar with Mighty Oaks, but kind of short, just spill. We help first responders, service members, and their spouses, veterans and active duty, struggling with post-traumatic stress. We bring them to a 5-day camp, completely free, peer-to-peer based mentorship. If you want to learn more, go watch my dad's podcast or go to mightyoaksprograms.org. But what I do for Mighty Oaks is I'm the international programs director. I joined Mighty Oaks because I wanted to serve these type of people. But then while being in Mighty Oaks, there was opportunities that came up to do international ministry in Afghanistan, Peru, and most recently, Ukraine. And I saw that as a great opportunity for me to use my expertise from the Marine Corps of working with locals to go into these areas and work with a local chaplain network.
Okay, let's actually get into Afghanistan, because we had Chad on, we had Tim Kennedy on, we had Sarah Verardo on, talking around the stuff that was happening during the pullout from Afghanistan and all the subsequent things that Save Our Allies did. But there's a very appropriate quote from actually a book that we're helping push right now, which is A Mission Without Borders. This is a book that your dad wrote, which talks about the mission y'all had in Ukraine, which we'll get to in just a second. But at the end of the book, you have your own section, and I actually want to read one of your quotes here. Not being able to go into Afghanistan personally that summer hurt. I've never been the guy who gets held back, especially as a Marine. I've always volunteered, always wanted to be the first guy to put up his hand no matter what the mission. But in that summer of 2021, when I was told to stay right where I was in Abu Dhabi, I was deeply frustrated. I also understood the position my dad was in as both a leader and a father. I'm sure it wasn't easy for him to make those calls. And so, obviously, no spoiler alert, you weren't allowed, on the ground in Afghanistan, to be a part of what, Tim and Chad and Sea Spray and all those guys were doing actually on the ground. And you didn't really like that very much. And so let's get into why that decision was made, and also what you were prepared to do if a different decision had been made.
Yeah, obviously I went there with the intention of going to Afghanistan. I went there with no other intention. I was dead set on doing that, and when I found out I was not going, I was definitely hurt. I can get into all the personal reasons for it, but that doesn't matter. God had me wait for a reason. What it really comes down to, God had me working within the humanitarian city during that season there, but it hurt. If I would lie to you if I said I wasn't hurt, because my whole life I've always been the one that said yes to doing the most crazy stuff, because I'm not really I know where I'm going when I die. And so the fear of death doesn't scare me. I think maybe the fear of it hurting scares me. But the fear of death doesn't scare me, because I know where I'm going to be. And so hearing that I had to stay back, hearing that I wasn't going to be able to hop on a plane and go over there, but other people were going to be allowed to go, that I felt weren't qualified or weren't the right person for the task, that was something that I had to put on the shoulders of Christ, because I couldn't handle that on my own. I couldn't handle hearing that I was the one being put on the bench, because I was the one that was always off the bench. I was the one in Afghanistan that was always volunteering to make sure that I was on the machine gun. I was always like the guy trying to go on every single mission, because I wanted to be known as that guy. I wanted to be known as the guy that wasn't afraid, that wasn't someone that would back down, but someone that could lead.
When I know, obviously we can connect the dots looking backwards, but you couldn't have known that what popped off in Ukraine was actually going to pop off. There were signs everywhere. Obviously, when the Biden administration took over, I'm sure Putin was just licking his chops, thinking about all the borders that he could push back for the sake of Mother Russia. And so Ukraine happens. Your father, I believe, was actually on the ground in Ukraine right before the actual invasion. But this time was different in terms of your involvement, because you were going to be pulled in to help in Ukraine, not because of, nepotism, or because, your dad really likes you and, you missed your shot in Afghanistan, so let's go, play soldier over here in Ukraine. But you were actually very qualified to help out with a very specific task, which actually was your initial foray into getting into what was going on in Ukraine. So take us through that.
Yeah. So the night the invasion happened in Ukraine, my dad was actually at home at this time. So
okay,
him and I live 8 minutes from each other.
Oh, yeah, it was Sea Spray that was actually in country, right? He was already in country. That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Sea Spray knew something was about to kick off.
Yeah.
And so, everything comes up on Instagram. So I get a text from my buddy Steve, like saying, "Hey, did you see what happened in Ukraine?" Because like a month before, we were talking about the Russians staged up on the border. And I was like, they're not going to do anything. Like, Putin's just flexing. Like, that's not going to happen. Text me. I look at my phone, and sure enough, I'm watching live warfare on like news cameras in Kyiv. Kyiv is being attacked. Kyiv is being bombed. And I'm like, oh my gosh, there's like Kyiv is being like straight up World War II style ambush. And so I texted my dad. I said, "Hey, did you see like what's going on in Ukraine right now? Like, it's actually happened." And then the typical talk of like, what are we going to do now? Like, this was around the time that like the whole SOA thing was happening. It was like the world superheroes, right? And so it's like, oh, what are the Avengers going to do? Like, we're going to fly over there. And so I was pumped. I was like, we're obviously going to do something. We're obviously going to go help. So within 24 hours, we had a team ready to go. And I was a part of that team. And some stuff happened, some administrative stuff, and kind of that plan for that team to go over to Ukraine dissolved. And it was just going to be my dad. And I really wanted to go with my dad. I really wanted to go to Ukraine with him originally. But I had to stay back. And that frustrated me, because that took me back to that point in Abu Dhabi when I was benched of not going to Afghanistan. I felt like I was being benched again. And I was like, all right, God, like, I can either choose to be like super angry about this and like just annoyed again, or I can just choose to like follow what you're calling me to do, continue to serve where I'm at, and eventually you'll place me where I need to be. And that's what happened. 6 days later, I was in Krakow, Poland. The reason I went to Krakow, Poland originally was I needed to bring some gear over there. Sea Spray saw a crack in the system within Ukraine and within the infrastructure. The Russians were hitting the communications networks and the power grids, and he needed to get a communications infrastructure built. So I helped facilitate in creating this communications infrastructure within Ukraine. And so I got the equipment in the U.S., probably almost $1 million worth, put it all in bags, and flew from Houston to Krakow. I had a ton of bags. I don't know how I didn't get stopped by U.S. Customs. I did not get stopped in Germany by their customs, and I did not get stopped in Poland by their customs. It's an act of God, right? I mean, the stuff that I was bringing across, it's not like I was bringing across weapons or anything that's lethal, but I'm bringing across thousands and thousands of dollars of equipment. I mean, if you're traveling with jewelry and you don't like disclaim it at like customs, like traveling, like that can cause some problems. And meanwhile, I'm traveling with almost $1 million worth of radios in a bag. So, and I had like a funny story. I was boarding my flight to Frankfurt, and the gate agent is like, "Oh, you can't take this bag on," and this bag was full of lithium batteries. And I'm like, dude, like I can't check this bag in. It's literally full of batteries. He's like, well, you got to figure something out or you're not getting on the plane. So I had to take like almost 100 pounds of lithium batteries, find every crevice in my backpack and throw this backpack on. So I walked across all of Europe with this backpack full of lithium batteries just to make sure that those lithium batteries that go in those radios were able to make its way to Ukraine.
Hey, you were like the Energizer Bunny there temporarily.
Yeah, I literally was. I got the nickname FedEx because I became the shipping dude. So that's kind of how I got pulled into it. And I met some great dudes upon arrival. It was weird coming from a regular unit, not a regular unit, but we were a specialized unit, but not like tier 1 or anything. And then going to where I was in Poland and coming into a room. And there was a guy in there. I'm not going to say his name for security reasons, but Seaspray was also in there. And I get there with all these bags and say, like, welcome to the show, man. We're so glad you're here. Let me make you a cup of coffee. I made your bed upstairs. There's a towel on the bed for you to take a shower. Go get some rest. Like, enjoy your time. And I was like, man, like, I felt like I was part of the team. Like, I felt like I finally made it at this point in time.
Well, that's got to be a great feeling because you don't strike me as a guy that needs the accolades. You don't strike me as a guy that needs, the pat on the head. But it is one thing when you're outside looking in on the team that you want to be a part of. And so, it's obviously very good that you were there. And again, you were there because you weren't just trained in a way to where you could find all this equipment in America, because you didn't just go to Best Buy, right? You had to really work hard to find all this equipment in America. But then over there, you had to get ready to get all this stuff set up. And so it wasn't like, okay, thank you, FedEx, for getting this all here. Now we're going to let the professionals take care of it. So take me through the process of just getting these things set up, because I'm assuming it wasn't like the most exciting work ever, but in terms of importance, it was incredibly important.
Yeah, this was one of the most important parts of what we did in Ukraine, other than rescuing people and saving their lives. But no one knew communications equipment like I did. I think I'm a little bit of a nerd. Like, I might definitely be on the spectrum, especially for like communication stuff. Like, it has to be done perfect. Like,
oh boy,
like I have to have my communication stuff right. What I did in the Marine Corps involved a lot of radios, and if like one radio doesn't work, that means it's like the daisy chain of stuff not working. So I expected these guys, my dad, Seaspray, and some of the other guys there, to be able to pick these things up and start programming them and getting everything set. And that wasn't the case. They looked at it like it was a rock and they didn't know what to do. The only one that really knew about it was Seaspray. He kind of knows everything about radios. But he wasn't going to be able to do it by himself, and he didn't have time to do really any of them. So I got asked to stay, and I basically stayed up for like 4 days straight, programming radios, contacting companies within the United States to get these radios programmed, activating everything, making the communications packages. So going through each one of these pieces of equipment, getting serial numbers off of them so we knew where these pieces of equipment were going. After they were staged and ready to go, I would get their serial numbers. I would put them into our database so I could see them on a screen, live feed, basically where these pieces of equipment were at within the country, and tested everything, and then we activated it. We had chaplains from Ukraine come into Poland. I gave them the equipment, and we did our test run with about 15 pieces of equipment. They went into the country, and we saw the spider web form. And, I was like, holy cow, like I just did something that I don't think anyone has ever done in the history of the world. And now I'm watching it unfold in front of my eyes. And I didn't do this for money. I didn't do it for accolades. I didn't do it for anything other than I felt like God was calling me to help. and seeing how God is able to give me the energy to program about 150 like pieces of equipment by myself, and countless hours of like wanting to throw a laptop across the room. I was able to see how those pieces of equipment were going to ultimately save people's lives and still save people's lives to this day.
Well, I'm going to be real honest. I'm glad you were there, because if it were up to me, those people of Ukraine would have been absolutely screwed. And so we need guys like you to do your thing. But no, the same thing is true about the church. The body is not all one part. You have many parts that make up the whole, that make up the body. The same thing goes into the mission that you guys had in Ukraine. But you were there. It wasn't like, hey, thanks for setting up the radios, peace out. You were there for a while. You stuck around for a while. I want to kind of get an understanding from your perspective about the reality of what you saw or what the team saw on the ground, because this hasn't been widely reported, but there were Russian special operations snipers that were targeting U.S. and other humanitarian aid workers in Ukraine. There were Russian kill squads that were going into civilian communities where they knew there were no military-age males and systematically executing the elderly men, but also the women and children of all ages, throwing them into mass graves, stuff that we should be hearing about. But if we were to hear about them, maybe, it would kind of throw off our support for certain political candidates or something or other. It's just not really that important for anybody to hear. But what did you and the rest of the team see when you were actually there on the ground while the conflict was happening, as it, is still ongoing?
Yeah. I've been there over 10 times now, and it still doesn't I don't get used to it. Seeing the stuff that you see over there, because it's not like this is a Taliban fighting force. This is a conventional military doing conventional military type of things to civilians. So seeing some of the stuff that you see in this type of warfare is like World War I, World War II type of stuff. Cities completely leveled to the ground. Civilians dead on streets. Obviously, you see Ukrainian and Russian soldiers dead on the streets. There's a lot of death and destruction. If I could do 2 words to sum it up, is death and destruction everywhere east of Kyiv. And you see the people that are living, you see the death in their eyes. You see them walking around like zombies because they're in constant fear of if they're going to live that next day. They're in fear if their kids are going to be able to walk to school freely without getting hit by a rocket coming from the Russians. It's just so much evil. So much evil is visible there. Yeah.
Well, so let me actually ask you about that a little bit more, because everyone that's done any level of Christian apologetics has dealt with this question, because it's kind of the first question, which is the problem of evil. Mm. And so it's like, okay, how can bad things happen to good people? Then you obviously have to unpack, okay, what do you mean by good people? What do you mean by bad things? What do you mean by, are you holding the ultimate seed of judgment? Can you see all the different tendrils that come off of this one situation? And you just kind of go on, and then everyone leaves angry. But like for you, where is God in this conflict? Because there are people in America, Hunter, as you know, as you sit here in America right now, that they feel like they are suffering persecution because someone left a mean comment on their Instagram when they shared a scripture or, a video of their favorite pastor. And you have these people that, these cowardly pastors that won't stand up and say anything like about, transgenderism of children or, forced upon them. They won't say anything about abortion. They won't say anything about, an Olympic athlete, a female getting beaten up by a man, or they won't say anything about any of these things because they just want to be about the gospel, even though they're not really about that either. And so I'm just curious, like for the people over there on the ground, are they seeing God work even in the midst of rubble and dead bodies?
Absolutely. Yeah. There is no place on this planet with universe, galaxy, whatever, we can go past all that, right? There's nowhere where God is not at. He is with us everywhere. And I've seen Ukrainians attest to this, and I can personally attest to this with, multiple times in Ukraine, seeing God work within the ministry that we're doing to saving our lives. Like, He is there. But to go back to your original question with why do bad things happen to good people? Well, first of all, as a biblical Christian, right, the Bible clearly states that like we were born into sin, right? We are not good people. We can be a nice person. We could be a person that gives the clothes off our back. We can, honor God all of our days, but we are a sinful nature. And so therefore we've allowed sin into this world. That means evil is going to come to this world, right? What's happening in our country, right? We allowed this to happen in our country. Our politicians didn't allow this. Us as the community, for not sticking up for what's right, we allowed sin to come into our country. And so we see evil happening in the world. And we're like, well, if there's a God, like, why would God allow this? Well, we allowed this, right? We allowed sin into our heart. Sin is the recipe for evil and destruction and death to happen. So it's just, as much evil that is happening within our world, but specifically Ukraine for this topic, I've seen God move so much in that evil place, because there is always light where there is darkness.
Hey guys, real quick, as you've likely heard me talk about on the show before, it took me forever before I started taking supplements of any kind. I was always nervous about taking like whey protein and creatine or really anything beyond that, because I was just afraid of what was in the product and if it was going to like give me cancer someday or something like that. And I was always scared of these companies, these supplement companies, just cutting corners and using low quality products and eventually putting things in their products that could cause problems for me and my body. So I've always wanted to partner up with an American company that uses high quality ingredients in their supplements. And that's why I want to remind you guys that we are partnered with Jocko Fuel. So Jocko Fuel is Jocko Willing's American-based supplement company. So what are some of my favorite products that they make that I also use? They have the best tasting greens powder on the market. I love the peach flavor myself. They also make whey protein powder. The banana cream is my favorite. They make energy drinks. The Jocko Go energy drinks, my favorite, is currently a tie between their iced tea lemonade and their pink lemonade flavors. I also use their Creel oil, their creatine, their vitamin D, and also their sleep aids. And they make a bunch of other stuff like ready to drink protein cookies, which are actually really delicious. My boys even like them, pre-workout powder, and much, much more. Guys, if you take your health and wellness seriously, then you've got to put high quality products in your body. Try Jocko Fuel out today by going to www.jockofuel.com. That's jockofuel.com. Use the promo code Undaunted to get 10% off of your order. Again, that's jockofuel.com, promo code Undaunted to get 10% off of your order. Well, Hunter, tell me a little bit more about what you experienced from the pastors there, because it's elucidated a little bit in the book, A Mission Without Borders, but when push comes to shove, you see who the tough guys are, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're a jiu-jitsu guy, like your dad was a fighter. There's the guys that are popping their mouth off, like pointing their fingers at dudes in the bar. And then there's the guys that are just about it. And we're seeing that with pastors. It's like, okay, you kind of saw who the real dudes were in the 1930s in Germany when the Third Reich was rising, and there were certain pastors that were willing to stand up against that, and there were certain pastors that were not, and some even like a Dietrich Bonhoeffer that were down to try and kill the guy, right?
Yeah.
Hitler, that was in charge of the rise of the Nazi Party. But then you get to Christians in America, and again, it's kind of like this whole squishy thing. It's like, oh, we don't want to be about the culture war. But then it's like, wait, so do you only want atheists running the government? Do you only want atheists running the culture? Do you only want atheists teaching your children? Like, help me understand your position. But then you go to Ukraine, and y'all are seeing guys that are actively a part of the war effort. They're not just giving bottles of water to dying men and praying for their families once they're gone. So talk to me a little bit about what you saw from these pastors and what you've seen from them continuously.
Yeah, these pastors are willing to go into the trenches with these men and fight with these men. There's not a lot of chaplains in Ukraine that do that. Mainly the ones that are part of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Those ones are who do not fight. But the ones that are part of the non-denominational, the Protestant movement, those guys are the ones that are willing to pick up a rifle and throw down with soldiers. And that's the type of pastor we need in America. We need a man that's willing to stand up for truth, to fight for truth, right? Because we have a lot of pastors within the U.S. that are afraid to say these specific things or talk about tough subjects because they're worried about people not coming to their church or worried about offending people. Meanwhile, you have pastors in Ukraine who are literally fighting for their country, killing, not murdering, killing enemy soldiers that are trying to kill them, their friends, and their families.
The reason why Undaunted.Life is here, Hunter, is to equip men to push back darkness. the thing that's easy as an American is that there's darkness, but it's not like darkness like an invading army or an invading military, rather. Like it's not a darkness like that. And so for a lot of us, we can get really philosophical about darkness. And of course, there's the spiritual darkness that's always coming. And there's, the cultural rot that we're currently living in here in America. But you do wonder who are going to be those pastors that when push comes to shove, they might do a sermon about just war theory. But then when it's time to pick up an M4, it's like, oh boy. And I was just talking with someone the other day, Hunter, that, I forget even the context, but he's like, yeah, I just don't really know if I could kill someone. I guess I would just, have to see how I felt in the moment. I'm like, that's literally the exact wrong opinion to have at this moment, because at the time of decision, like the time for decision has passed. If you have not pre-decided that you are capable of taking a life that is trying to take another innocent life, it's too late for you. Mm-hmm. And so, Hunter, I don't know what it looks like from your perspective, but like, I feel like if we were invaded from both sides, the Atlantic and the Pacific, I would hope that a lot of these pastors would drop the whole, go along to get along. I want to be known for what I'm for and not what I'm against thing. But I would assume most of them would bend over and just take it. What do you think?
I agree 100% with you. I think the men in this country lack masculinity, not in a way of being like the macho, egotistic, narcissistic guy, but the guy that's willing to stand up for what's right.
I think
and what we have going on in our country, right now is we've taken God out of everything, right? And we've taken what it is to be a Christian man out of our churches, because that starts with our pastors. I can go on here and name certain pastors, but I'm not going to, because it's the body itself, right? We have weak leaders as pastors that when push comes to shove, they're going to run and hide, or they're going to give in instead of fighting for truth.
I mean, Hunter, we saw that in 2020.
Yeah.
We saw so many pastors say, okay, daddy government, we will keep our doors closed and we will open them when you allow us to again. But don't worry, we'll wear the exact masks that you tell us to mask, and we'll do all those things. Because there's a difference from being concerned about your flock, because in the early days of COVID, we didn't know what it was. We didn't know if it was going to kill like children in the same way it killed the elderly. And so it's like, well, we had no idea. But then when we kind of had an idea, there were still so many pastors that were like, well, daddy government hasn't told me what I'm allowed to do yet. And so I'm concerned because, whether you believe in any of this stuff or not, some people see 2020 as a dry run. It's like, let's see how far we can push the populace in a particular direction and see how much control we can gain over their brains. Yeah. And then the next time we'll just start from there, or we'll start right before that point and then push it a little bit further. And I don't see a lot of pastors that I think are going to stand up and even vocalize negativity towards the man or towards the dominant hegemonic governmental structure, because again, they're maybe afraid of losing their tax exempt status. They're afraid of being seen as divisive. They're afraid of being seen as the type of guy that would overturn a table when somebody is violating the Father's house. And Hunter, that's one thing that we're doing. I'm trying to make man-friendly churches be a reality. I kind of stopped caring about men's ministry, because you know what men's ministry is? For the most part, it's once a year. We're going to bring in, a speaker like your dad or a speaker like me to come in and yell at you guys and get you all fired up. Everyone's going to eat some barbecue, and then we're going to bounce. And then it's another year until that church does a damn thing for any of the men in their congregation, except for to castigate them on Father's Day for not stepping up. And it's like, what are you doing exactly to equip these men so that they can be ready to go and discipled and catechizing of their children on a year-round basis? You're doing nothing, and yet you want to complain. So, I mean, I'm in this fight until the bitter end, but we just need even more guys like you that have the same philosophy to be like, yeah, amen, I'll raise my hand and volunteer for that service as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important that, like you were saying, that one event per year, like you can't be a Christian man and just go to church one time a year or go to that one event per year. You need to literally do it every single day. And like it says that in the Bible, right? Like to pick up your cross daily and walk. And like that's how you lead your family, right? You lead your family, that leads the community.
Well, Hunter, imagine going to jiu-jitsu on January 1st, doing a class, rolling 5 or 6 rounds, and then saying, all right, good for the year. I'm good for the year now. I am so mega dangerous. I don't need to train again until next year. Like, you wouldn't do that with jujitsu or with exercise. You wouldn't take one day of eating right and then only McDonald's for the rest of the year. Like, everybody kind of inherently knows that. But then we're just seemingly okay with our churches basically having blinking neon signs on the outside saying, men, this isn't for you. Mm-hmm. So the sermon content is going to be focused more on grace and on, softer skills and on how to be a better person. The music is going to be homoerotic in nature, at least lyrically. It's going to be sung by these doughy men and these, frumpy women. And we're just supposed to get like fired up and excited about that. And it's guys like you and it's guys like, the guys you're around in the military and in the Marine Corps and things like that. That's why we try to do things like what we do at Undaunted, because there's a whole population of guys that are ready to just be given that opportunity like you were given in Ukraine. But they want to do that in service of the local church. They want to do that in service, of the local populace, but they don't necessarily want to sit there and hold a crying baby. They don't necessarily want to, go to the nursing home and hold the hand of a woman who's lonely. I'm not saying those things are bad, but these are men that want to be activated in a different way. These are men that when a tornado rips through Oklahoma or Texas and destroys a community, they want a church that goes to Lowe's, buys 20 chainsaws and asks for 20 volunteers and says, guys, we got chainsaws and work gloves. We need to go start cutting down some trees to help some people get their lives back together. But we don't do that, right? So it's all just kind of the normal Christianese stuff.
Yeah, the church has what I've seen is the church is just somewhere to go on Sunday and check the box for many men. And the men that are, I did a program 2 weeks ago for Mighty Oaks instructing, and some of the men I saw were struggling with this exact thing we're talking about. They're involved in a church, but they don't feel like they have a purpose there. They feel like they don't connect because their pastor isn't a masculine man. They did say that their worship leader was a doughboy. So that was like almost the word straight from him. Guys need a purpose, right? We are men, or we are a being that needs a purpose. We need to feel like we are part of something. And if the church isn't doing that, we're going to have a lot of men falling short, right? And so there needs to be a shift within our church community where we enable men, we provide the opportunity for men to serve. I think a great way to serve is starting off within your community. Look at the problem with drug addiction right now and alcohol within your own community. Everywhere you look, you probably can find someone that struggles with drinking too much or someone that struggles with substance abuse. I've never struggled with substance abuse, but I know that is a very common thing amongst our country. Like, why don't you start there? Why don't you go find the guy at your local bar that is there all the time and just go talk to him? I'm not saying you need to drink with him, but go talk to him. Like, hey man, what's your name? Get to know the guy. Get on that peer-to-peer level with that guy. I think to really understand ministry, get involved locally. I always say, you don't have to be called to Africa, Ukraine, Peru, or some other country to do ministry. Look at your back door, because there's going to be people at your back door. Don't jump over those people at your back door to go to a different country. Look at what's in your back door so that your community can get healthy.
Right. And Hunter, ministry doesn't mean a microphone in front of your face and a podcast recording video. It doesn't mean a microphone on your face up on a stage talking in front of people. It might mean that, but it's all the unsung heroes that are doing exactly what you're saying and saying, yes, Lord, I guess I will go and talk to this random stranger and give them a word or to see what I can do to encourage them. And, even just recently, I was in New Mexico. I had just finished a speaking engagement. I'm driving back home to Oklahoma, and I go to, I can't remember if I've told the story on the show, so if you've heard this before, deal with it. You're hearing it again. But we're at a gas station, and it's kind of in a weird spot, and none of the credit card machines are working on any of the gas pumps. And so I go inside and I kind of get my gas going or whatever. And then behind me, I hear, "Excuse me, sir." And I can automatically be like, oh, great, here we go. Some person that's got the sob story and they need my money and the blah, blah, and all that. And I turn around And this dude is completely covered in tattoos. And I've watched a whole lot of shows about different gangs and prison gangs and all that. And so honest to goodness, I recognized his gang tattoos. I knew exactly what clique he was with. I kind of had a good idea that he had been in prison and what he was in prison for, just from his tattoos. Okay. And so I'm like, all right, this is going to be a little bit of a different interaction. But he's like, hey, man, like the cards aren't working. I literally don't have any cash. I'm trying to get to Albuquerque. My wife and son were in an accident. Like anything that you can do to help. I'm like, so I was able to help this guy get some gas. But while I'm at the pump, obviously, having some caution for a guy that's got his entire rap sheet basically written on his skin, I literally just go, hey, man, were you clicked up? And he just kind of like puts his head up and he's like, yeah, man, I was clicked up. I was like, how long were you in? He didn't say he was, but I just asked him, like, how long were you in? He's like, I went in 1998 and I just got out a few months ago. Well, you can do math and realize that he wasn't in there because he stole a pack of gum. But in that moment, I was like, hey, man, when you were in prison, did you ever have a chaplain or anybody talk to you about Jesus? And this is kind of that moment to where it's like, all right, we're about to figure out what this interaction's about to be all about. And he goes, you know what, man, one of the homies, when I was in prison, when I was like at my worst, one of my homies told me about Jesus. And like he gave me a Bible. I told him I was illiterate, that I couldn't read. And so one of the homies, like one of the OGs in his clique, was reading the Bible to him on a daily basis. And just think about this story, Hunter. If I had said, hey, man, go away, like I'm not giving you any money, get out of here. Or if I had just gone the route of like, here's you some gasoline, let's just move on with our lives. But I felt the Holy Spirit telling me, just ask him. Just ask him about Jesus. Just ask him if he's heard the name of Jesus. And it led to this really interesting interaction where I was able to put my hands on him and we were able to pray over each other and pray over his family. And his son is in a gang now. And like he got in a gang while his dad was in prison. It's like this whole thing, right? But so many guys are just unwilling to take that next step because either it doesn't seem sexy enough or doesn't seem important enough, or they're too cowardly to kind of get those words out of their face hole. So I know that was kind of a longer story, but I think that gets to your point, Hunter, to not focus on macro ministry when micro ministry is all around us.
Yeah, everywhere.
Yeah, and so I think that's a good example, and it's a good reminder for everybody listening to this. I do want to actually circle back to Ukraine, because there's a very interesting story that is talked about in A Mission Without Borders, and it's at a checkpoint. And so typically you were not lead, you were not at a checkpoint, but I do want to read this quote here from the book. I faced what felt like my biggest risk of the whole war, the risk of having to step up to lead when others' lives depended on the decision I made in that moment. And so I want to go back to that moment when you're at that checkpoint, and these are checkpoints where things can go south. Like that is just the reality of what y'all were doing. So paint the picture for us. What was going on at the checkpoint? What was going on in your head? And then how'd you get through it?
Yeah. Are you talking about the beginning of the book or more towards the back of the book?
More towards the back of the book.
Okay. Yeah. So this was like my first mission I was leading in Ukraine by myself. And there was a lot of weight on my shoulders because the guys I was leading were very qualified individuals. But I had one of my best friends with me, Steve Latham. Him and I were in Afghanistan together. We were in the same unit together for my entire Marine Corps career. We were like Jonathan and David close, and we still are. I mean, I talked to him this morning. We talk every single day. And I became very close with his family throughout the years. And so basically before we even left Afghanistan in 2019, I promised his wife, Haley, at their wedding that I would basically do anything I could to always protect her husband and die for her husband if I had to make sure that he came home to her. And so our relationship was closer than the personal level. It was like literally I was friends with his entire family. So being in Ukraine with him, I felt like the responsibility of not only leading my team, but keeping my team safe was extremely important, because these guys weren't just depending on me to get them out of a hard situation, but also depending on me to get them back home safe to their families. These guys have kids, wives, families. Like it's a serious deal when you're going into this type of area. And so I remember like even being on the plane ride going to Ukraine or going to Poland, like, wow, like I'm going to have to make decisions within the next few days that are going to be life and death. And sure enough, we get to an area in eastern Ukraine called Bakhmut, and we start getting bracketed on by artillery. You know, just got into this terrible situation where I had to make the decision to either stay at that spot, ride it out, or get my team out of there. And we chose to leave. We got out of there, and we went to safety. And I look back at that situation, and well, in that situation, I was like, that was my biggest decision in leadership that I've ever had to make in my life. It was like the transition of like being a young leader to growing into like an actual like grown up, making grown up decisions in a straight up combat environment. Because when you're in the Marine Corps, it's kind of like you're in combat. It's kind of like, I don't know, you got 19 and 20-year-olds together. Like you get into something, and if something goes wrong, it's like you just tell the officer or like tell your staff and CO, like everybody knows what to do, right? We got the guy, the head honcho, but then you get into that position as the head honcho. You get into that position as like the guy that's got to make the hard decisions. The guy that's got to be like, I know people are going to die if we stay here, and I know people could die if we get out of here. Like I had to be willing to take the risk of knowing that there was death on either side of this, but having the ultimate faith in Christ that he was going to get us out safely was the biggest point in me, like truly learning what leadership was.
Well, I'm glad you made it out, and I'm glad you're here. Hunter, what is the status as it stands right now of the conflict? Because it's really hard, especially since we're in this crazy news cycle where not that long ago, President Trump was shot, and that got memory hold, and now everything's about the switcheroo to Kamala Harris and, you know, the Democratic National Convention and all the, like, there's just so many things happening where we don't really have an appetite for what's going on in Ukraine. But for all intents and purposes, anyone who's even mildly paying attention is like, all right, this seems like a stalemate. This seems like a stalemate until something incredibly bold happens. And those options are typically like, all right, Ukraine decides that they're going to give up part of their country to Russia to have some sort of a, you know, pseudo peace, or this thing goes nuclear. What's your read of where we're at right now?
I have so many reads on where it could go. It's like throwing a dice and seeing which one it lands on, right? But Russia is throwing so many bodies and so many men at the front line that Russia can afford to lose men. If they lose one, they replace them with another. Red Army, Soviet style. Ukraine, on the other hand, cannot. So Ukraine is losing at least 1,000 soldiers per day. And okay, so this war has been going on for 2.5 years now. I'm not no math genius. I can't do the math on it per day, but do the math on it, right? Think about how many guys are dying. Think about how many guys are dying on the Russian side. Ukraine is losing men at a staggering rate and will not be able to keep up with the amount of men they're losing, and they won't be able to have a military to fight for their country. So Russia is chipping away, right? They're chipping away at the rock until there's no more rock left. The only way for this to end peacefully is for a ceasefire to happen, is for the Ukrainian government to give the land that they have lost to the Russians to Russia. Let them have it. Most of those areas are pro-Russian anyway. They don't really care for Ukraine. That's the way that I think this needs to end. I think Zelensky needs to be like, all right, look, too many Ukrainian men are dying. We're going to have no more Ukrainian men left to even produce a new population, right? They need to put the line in the sand and say, hey, like, what's the point of surrendering? And what's the point of doing what's best for my country and doing what's best for the people and best for the world compared to getting billions of dollars in his pocket? Because it sucks. Because I love the Ukrainian people so much. Like, I got Ukrainian trident tattooed on my wrist. Like, those people are like family to me. And to see these men dying, to see some of the men that I worked with at the beginning that were not obligated to go into the military, that have had to go into the military and now have died because of stupid politics, it sucks. Like, there's no win for anyone in this war. Like, as much as I think the Russians are evil, there's Russian men that don't know what they're going to do. Like, they don't know they're going to a war. There's so much propaganda there. They think they're going to train, and then they end up getting shot at. Like, those Russian men need Christ just as much as the Ukrainians and just as much as we do.
Amen.
Like, so that's my thought. Like, the only way for this to end is there needs to be a ceasefire, and Zelensky just needs to let those areas of Ukraine go. There's no infrastructure left in those areas that Russia holds. Like, they flattened everything. So, like, all they would be getting back is muddy dirt. Like, it's just, there's no wind to it. They need to stop.
So we'll make this the last question of the day, because, and I told Chad this, as soon as I saw the cover for the book, I was like, hey man, just the fact that there's a Ukrainian flag on there is going to rub a lot of people the wrong way, because the only people that have, like, you know, a Ukrainian flag emoji in their bio are typically slobbering progressive leftists.
Yeah.
It's not typically conservative people. It's not typically Christians. And you're right. Everyone in this conflict needs Jesus, and like all these people need our love and concern. But as Americans, man, we just don't like this conflict very much. And it's because of what you alluded to. It's because of the deep corruption of the Ukrainian government and oligarchs, the amount of money that we're sending over there that is not getting to the frontline soldiers. People like the people on your team should not be taking freaking tourniquets to soldiers that are out there fighting for Ukraine. We keep hearing about these operations where we're sending money over there and it gets laundered right back here into the coffers of politicians here in this country. It stinks. It stinks to high heaven, and we will never know to what levels the corruption has gone to, because this is going to get memory hold just like everything else. But from your perspective, how should Americans view this entire situation, not just the conflict, but Ukraine as a country, the Ukrainian people? How should we view it moving forward?
I'll start that with a question. What would you want if Mexico and Canada were to converge on our borders today on a full scale level, and let's just hypothetically say our military wasn't as strong as it was or is, what would you want? Would you want other countries coming here to give your family food, to bring medical supplies to your sons and your husbands fighting on a front line, to give them boots? Would you want that help? Now, let's bring this to another area. I do not personally agree with the cash value that we are sending to Ukraine. I think it's dumb that we are sending physical money to Ukraine. I do not think it's dumb that we are sending weapons to Ukraine,
right, because
it's protecting us. It's protecting Ukraine. I've personally been saved by Patriot systems in Ukraine. I can agree with sending weapons there, and with oversight of it though, because we don't want something to happen like with what happened with the Taliban in the late 90s. But the whole sending my tax dollars to Ukraine for it to go to the politicians of Ukraine, not to the people of Ukraine who I love so much, that's what frustrates me. Because you have politicians all over the world getting rich from the money that is being sent to Ukraine. Like, I love Ukraine. I support Ukraine. I even support parts of the Ukrainian government. But the hierarchy of the U.S. government and the Ukrainian government, I think that's where the money is going. I know, because you got guys that don't even have real tourniquets on the battlefield. So it hurts. I mean, every single person in the United States right now is feeling the struggle of our economy. Every single person. And the amount of tax that I have to personally pay, that you have to pay, like, it puts a strain on our family. And people are so angry about this. I mean, the VA, Veterans Affairs, can't even meet their budget right now. They're 40.5, I think the number I saw last week, $40.5 billion short of their budget. Like they can't be taking the money of hard-earned Americans, our tax dollars, forget about the problems and the struggles that we have in the United States, and give that cash to other countries. That's going to ultimately hurt us. This might sound evil, this might sound bad, but we have to put America first, right? We have to put our country first so that we are, in fact, healthy enough to help other countries. Because I think we should. I think us as Americans, we are the best example of helping people that cannot help themselves.
There are so many different through points and things that can be discussed with a conflict like this. And I hate that we're in this position, but we live in a post-Genesis 3 world where warfare is just a thing that we're all going to have to deal with at some point. And every now and then it comes directly to our front door. So, Hunter, we covered a lot of ground here today, but that's all for me. Is there anything else you want to get off your chest?
No, man, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. And I'll end it with the challenge for all these men in here is be patient, wait on God's timing. Sometimes your own timing won't make sense to you, and it'll be frustrating, but God's timing is always perfect.
Amen to that. All right, Hunter, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks, man. I appreciate it.
All right, guys, thanks so much for listening to my interview with Hunter. But before we let you go, we are going to do a quick resilience boost. At Undaunted.Life, our mission is equipping men to push back darkness with content that forges spiritual, mental, and physical resilience. So I've got links to the Save Our Allies website, the Mighty Oaks website, and an Amazon link to where you can buy a Mission Without Borders. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Wherever you're listening to this, please subscribe, rate, and leave us a positive 5-star review. If you want me to come speak live at your event or on your podcast, just shoot me an email to info@Undaunted.Life. That's info@Undaunted.Life. Follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook, and check out our website for everything else, including how to donate to keep more content like this coming your way. Just go to www.Undaunted.Life. And as always, we want to thank the band Holy Name for allowing us to use their music for our content. The music on this podcast is their song Perpetua, which is off their self-titled debut album on Face Down Records. The links are in the description. I'm your host, Kyle Thompson. Remember, keep pushing back darkness, keep forging spiritual, mental, and physical resilience, keep seeking the Lion of Judah.